Happy Friday, everybody. How's it going?
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. How are you doing, Veronika?
I'm
Welcome.
very good. How are you? Thank you. I'm happy to be here, the highlight of my day.
Oh, well, glad we could be a part of that. So,
But no beer so far, from what I've heard. So
No, I was hoping for happy hour, being truly happy hour, but it's still happy.
okay. Well, we could have the fine folks at Drizzly send you some beers, but it's too late for
sponsored
that.
by
Yeah, especially we had Emily from Drizzly on the show just earlier this week. So anyway, yeah. For people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Hopefully, it'll be a fun chat. So, I'm Veronica. I'm currently overseeing data at Saks.
Awesome. And you've been in the data space for a while. I know when we met several months ago, and you said originally you were well, tell people about your earlier experience. I think it's vast.
Yeah, so I've been in data my entire career. I fell into it just like everybody else. I actually went to college as pre-med. I have an undergrad in biology. And
Mm.
then when as I was in college, I kind of realized that I don't want to be a doctor. It's not really, I'm not passionate enough about that. And I absolutely hated biology. I went to a marine biology lab one time and it smelled like fish. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not something I want to do. So when I graduated, I was lucky enough to kind of I started as a data entry, went into computer operating, landed as a junior DBA. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. I absolutely love this. SQL is my jam. And then I went to college to get a master's degree in software engineering. At the time, there was no degrees in data. Arguably, there's still no degrees in data, especially in kind of operational data engineering space. But I do have a degree in software engineering, and it was really helpful. For majority of my career, I was a DBA, and I focused on performance tuning and optimization. So I could performance tune the crap, pardon my French, out of SQL Server.
Mm.
So I was doing code reviews. I was, and I've kind of worked for companies, and I've seen what you can really do when your system is designed well. You know, if you remember Monster.com, Monster was running on a SQL Server back in the day, and we were doing some really cool stuff with it. And from that moment on, I was like, I truly have appreciation for a well-designed system. And it doesn't mean that I have to be designed by the book. It just have to be designed in a very smart way.
you were calling yourself earlier a recovering DBA. Tell us about that. It sounds like you came all the way from the bottom of data entry up to DBA, and now you're like post DBA, maybe.
Yeah, I was, I've been a DBA supporting operational databases, doing kind of database design on the transactional side on OLTP, also supporting data warehouses for, I want to say 17 years. And at some point, I was like, I'm done with it. Like any day, while challenging, is not really exciting anymore. And I was like, ooh, Snowflake. Let me go after Snowflake. So I kind of, I was done with SQL Server. I still love, the software, the community, but I was done with it. So now I'm with Snowflake and Data Vault and analytics and this whole new exciting world of data.
Aren't you a Snowflake data hero or superhero,
I
whatever that is?
am a Snowflake data superhero. That is true. Yeah.
How do you become that?
Well, by just being involved in the community.
Okay.
So I am a chapter lead for the Snowflake Data Vault user group.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I just, blog occasionally. I speak sometimes.
That's really cool. I was
I
wondering
have
how
a
we could get
cape to
capes,
prove
but
it. I mean, the highlight, of being a Snowflake data superhero is that you
well, and you
get,
couldn't be a superhero without a cape. That'd be
I, I agree.
Spider-Man though. He doesn't have a cape, so
Yeah,
it's
we're kind
true.
of post Cape. I think those went out of style like 20
Yeah,
years
it's
ago in
true.
superhero movies.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, according to Edna from The Incredibles, it's actually not a good thing to have a cape when you're a superhero.
Exactly.
It's dangerous. So, but I'm
It's
all
in
about
reverse.
fashion.
That's
Dangerous and unfashionable. So, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
yeah. And Sonny says, yeah, data superhero. So, fun fact: all three of us, Sonny, Veronika, and myself, are on a panel next week for data modeling. So stay tuned on that. That's what, the 18th, I believe.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I think so.
Fun.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
Sunny.
Hey, what's up? Cool. Let's talk about data modeling. So I think, the reason I wanted to go through your experience, because I think you have some opinions on data models from a DBA's perspective.
Absolutely. I kind of like, what I've seen in the past, and probably what happens all the time. So, kind of going back to SQL Server running on Windows. Windows were always easy, right? You click, done. So what I've seen in the past is, people just go install SQL Server. It's click default. Everything's amazing. You just dump data into it. Great, until it reaches some threshold, and then it just falls over. It's like it's not performing well. It's taking a long time. The CPU on the server is pegged, and then you walk in and you realize that the database, the server, is not set up correctly. It's not designed well. Tables are not thought through. But then alternatively, if you actually put time up front to design your system to function optimally for your needs. So I just want to prefix here. So there are books and their theory and their things of how to do things right, which is great. But when the reality hits, that's not necessarily how things work. And I know there's a lot of people kind of like, oh my God, what are you saying? But, we used to disable foreign keys because it was just an additional constraint that was impacting performance. We'll test our data, make sure the referential integrity is respected, and test. But in production, we disabled them because it was better for performance. We used dirty reads. If you talk, like, I know if there's anybody from SQL Server kind of like dying right now, dirty reads, you read uncommitted data, but it's faster and doesn't log. You make that conscious decision, not for everything, but to make sure that your system is performing optimally. So I've seen these like tricky things and very elegant solutions that are not by the book, but are working perfectly well. And I really have appreciation for that. Don't dump everything into one table. Don't over normalize your stuff either. Just kind of approach it based on your needs.
And tell us your thoughts on like Snowflake optimization, because I think there's this message that like if you have Snowflake, you don't have to optimize it, and I haven't necessarily found that to be true.
Who
I'll
says
be frank.
this?
You'll see there are some like kind of marketing blog posts that sort of claim, oh, just put it in there and it's fine, that imply that maybe you don't need to think very hard about your
It's
data.
funny, Matt. The first time I spoke with a Snowflake rep, I want to say maybe it was 2016. So I'm a DBA, right? Like this is what I do. I optimize, right? Like, and he walked in and he's like, oh no, it just works. You don't need to do anything. It just works. And I look at him like, a bad query is a bad query. I can guarantee you that I can write a query bad enough that your Snowflake will fall over. So I think with Snowflake specifically, it gets you like from 0 to 60 without really much from you. But if you want to push it from 60 to 100, you really need to pay attention to your queries. You need to optimize to Snowflake. Snowflake is different, than Oracle and SQL Server. That's where you really need to understand how Snowflake works.
Yep.
And the other thing is like, it's not necessarily like, I mean, it's great to save money, I agree, but if you pay an X amount of money, squeeze the most out of it. Like, make sure you run as many processes as you can with the same, financial bill that you pay in Snowflake.
I think it was sort of the misnomer, I think, with not just Snowflake, but a lot of the next gen, I would say non RDBMS tools, though, right?
Yeah.
So it was like, well, Hadoop back then, just throw your data into that, and doesn't matter how you throw it in, just do it, and magical things will happen. Or Redshift, I think there was a bit of that too. That's still enforced a bit, I would say, or at least I think early on people were still treating it more like a traditional data warehouse. But then BigQuery, I think, was the one where I think that threw a lot of people off guard, because they're just like, I don't think, well, Jordan was saying they didn't even think of it as a data warehouse back then. It was just an analytics engine.
I mean,
So-
I'll be honest. I think I first encountered BigQuery in 2016, and I was already using Teradata and Hadoop at the time. And I was like reading through kind of the marketing pages and such. And I'm like, I don't really know what this is for. I don't understand what this product is. You use a SQL and it handles big data, but like, why would I use this?
But then Snowflake came along, and I think the thing they did really well is they knew how to talk to.
They knew how to message.
People who
totally
worked with data. So.
Well, partially like they knew how to talk to people. They kind of pissed all the DBAs off. They're like, oh, by the way, I was like, DBA's been, somebody was trying, it's like, I know we go through this, let's kill this. No, let's bring it back. So throughout my career, there's always been somebody who's trying to like tell me that I'll be out of job. At first it's like, oh my God, relational databases are so hard. NoSQL, yay, we no longer need you. We're like, all right, great. And then you tell me that your report can only return 10 customers because by the time you scan everything that's in NoSQL, things time out. So Snowflake was the other ones like, yeah, we don't need DBAs. Like in a backup perspective, maybe not, but like a DBA doesn't normally want to run backups manually either. Like that is the most boring thing in the world. We just automated it. So, but yeah.
Oh, go on, Matt.
And I think one of the big struggles too with Snowflake and BigQuery is that a lot of people realize they probably need to optimize something, but there wasn't always a lot of training on the differences between a relational database and a columnar database. And we've seen this again and again where people are trying to like apply transactional rights or updates, and it just brings the database to its knees, basically.
Yep.
And that's, again, very important, right? Like when you model your data, when you think of what model you even need for whatever your use case is, you have to take all of that into account. And I know you guys, I'm going to kind of plug in your book for a second. You covered all of these different things that, somebody who's designing a database need to think through right there. Well, I have my unsigned copy as well.
Okay,
Waiting for
we
my
got to fix
signed
that for
one.
you.
You have to. I'll keep bringing it up.
Product placement number 1. Thank you. What were you saying?
Sorry, I got distracted.
No worries.
Great book, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I get, it's just an interesting thing. So there was, and I think there still is, or some questions from DBAs, like, what do I do now? It seems like a lot of the magic that I've been managing behind the scenes, this is all taken care of by these tools, whether that's RDS or, Aurora or Snowflake or whatever else. What's your opinion? I mean, coming back from being like a hardcore, on the metal DBA to today, like what's changed in your perspective?
I mean, data observability is everything that DBAs ever did. Which is again, we love to assign new terms to old things, which is great. But I think if anybody truly understands observability of data of systems is the DBAs. So it's like such a normal, natural progression into that. Data ops is a great kind of like it's a bit of a mix. Some of it is what DBAs are used to. Some of it is software engineering, bringing their practices on board. So, I mean, the old-fashioned DBA, especially those who were just focused on maybe deploying code and, monitoring backups, that is going away. But honestly, that was the most boring thing in the world. Anyway, there's all these other opportunities and options that a DBA has.
Yeah, you were talking before the show about the difference between, say, software testing, so testing a function, versus data observability as you were doing it even before the term existed. Tell us a bit more about that.
There are a lot of things. So data sits in this like in the middle, right? Like we want to have people who have traditional background in data and DBAs, but database, especially from like data warehousing perspective, from analytics perspective, as I was kind of like growing up in this space, we just always deployed to production. And the reason for that is for data, we need to test on production data. Because you can design a report, you can, I don't know, alter a table, you can test your code in dev, but it's actually not meaningful. If you truly want to test, you need to test data. And at the time, back in on-prem systems, we didn't have ability to have another massive Teradata server to have a copy of production data so we could test. So we just deployed to production and kept our fingers crossed that everything would be great. But now, like software engineering, CI/CD, best practices, kind of like pulling into data ops is this like perfect world of take the best from every engineering space and just apply it to data.
Yeah, and that is one huge advantage of these cloud environments. I mean, we were talking earlier about how costs can spin out of control, which is true. But like if you want to create a staging environment, which is just a copy of production data, it's just like a click and it takes about a second to generate a virtual copy. And then you can start testing on that table instead of testing in production.
And then you just can throw it out and make another copy, which is a big deal, in the past also. Like, how do you refresh your test? And all of a sudden, this massive, event for everybody across the company. Oh my God, the test is broken. Oh.
Yeah, and I've worked with big budget companies where they do have 2 Teradata servers. And so it's like, all right, we're going to copy into the stage server or stage cluster. And it's like this big process pushing pushing data over the networking and everything. It's a huge deal and it has to be at off hours.
Off hours.
Yes. Whenever those are, if you happen to have.
Well, you don't really hear about that these days.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I have a funny story about the off hours. I had a call with Microsoft for something like a bug, and the engineer who picked up, and I was working for a .com company. He's like, "Well, can't you just do it during off hours?" I'm like, "This is a website, 24/7. What off hours? What are you talking about?"
That's interesting. So I guess fast forward today. What are your thoughts on like the notion of being on call? You run a team. Do you have people on call?
So, yes, I would like to be very like it's kind of like it goes along everything. Be very intentional about what is actually considered truly critical to wake somebody up, because it's like people generally go, "Oh, you're on call." Like, well, if it's not you, it's fine to just have somebody else wake up, which is part of like intentional. What are your SLA? Is it truly critical process? And it's always very interesting when you talk to business. They're like, okay, so, oh, we need to be up all the time. I'm like, really? Well, if you don't get this for 3 hours, would you be okay? They're like, yes. Well, then we don't need to be up 24/7. So just for the sake of kind of like, work-life balance.
Mhm.
Again, being on call for many years, it's not pleasant.
Kind of reminds me. I saw a picture recently of a local outdoor photographer. I think he's up in I don't know, was it Baffin Island, really north of here, like where there's polar bears. But it was just funny because they had this like handwritten sheet of like people who are supposed to be on watch duty for the small sailboat they're on. And it was like, that looks hateful because none of y'all are getting like any blocks of sleep at all, but you have to like watch for polar bears or icebergs. So,
Well,
threats. And it
mean,
reminds me a lot of being on call. So,
for polar
I'm sorry.
bears, I probably want to make sure there's staff 24/7 covering, I don't know.
Might help.
I heard they might get really, angry.
Oh, fun. So some of these we want to talk about, data modeling is one thing. And kind of diving into this a bit more before we started the talk, there was, I think you're kind of of the opinion really, and like what your take, but it seems like there's a lot of orthodoxy around data modeling, whether you're talking about, traditional star schemas or data vault, or I think any number of techniques. Matt and I talk about this quite often. It feels like a lot of the standards have been relaxed to some degree. Um, but there's definitely other camps where it feels like data modeling is, still very much religiously adhered to. What are your thoughts on this spectrum of perspectives on data modeling?
I know there are a lot of people that are very passionate about doing something, and that's okay. But I think the reality is that all of our companies are so different, and the business problems that we're trying to solve are so different that we should follow standards as much as we can. But if it makes it longer for us to deploy something, is that kind of like, how soon can you deliver something viable? You have to, I know somebody's going to hate me, but you have to be flexible at cut corners somewhere or find that hybrid. But at the same time, it's like, it's very interesting. The innovation happens when somebody challenges the status quo. But we're saying that you have to adhere to the rules. So how will innovation happen if there isn't somebody pushing and challenging? So it's this interesting balance of like, I am all for the rules. Rules are there, because they've been tested through time and they're meant, they're meant to be there. But at the same time, you kind of have to push against it to go to that next level, right? Like, what is the next thing? Like, how do we merge? Like, we have so much data now. We didn't have so much data 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We're in the cloud now. The rules were built for specific use cases, but now they're different use cases. So I kind of find like, how do you find yourself in the middle of that and kind of like take the best from everything?
And a standard example I'll cite is that these modern databases, these columnar databases, do really, really well with nested data. And so you can basically put in native nested JSON objects or arrays. And yet in third normal form, none of that is allowed. It's like, no, you cannot have any nesting in third normal form. And so in general, I wouldn't say you want to like widen your tables to contain everything. You still want to have joins in some cases, but you also want to take advantage of these modern features where it makes sense to do so.
Absolutely. And even back in the day, of on-prem and all the constraints that we had, I don't think I've ever built a pure third normal form database. It was always like, do you really need that join? Can you just put in like, it's okay. Like, make these little adjustments that are actually benefiting you. Because honestly, like if you talk about it, if your code runs faster, first of all, it's a better experience for your customers. But at the same time, I saw a headline where if your code runs long, your servers are overheated, you need more air conditioning, right? And then now you're not good for the environment. So kind of like, there are different perspectives, but like ultimately you want for your code to be easy to maintain, but also run faster. And we can go on this whole new rant. Do you want pretty code or do you want performant code? And I know my team always, I was like, I will go with a slightly ugly code that performs well.
Why did you make that the end of the trade-off?
For performant code
Yeah.
over pretty code?
Mhm.
I mean, it's not one or the other, but if I'm missing some tabs and I have lagging commas, or actually let me give you a more controversial example: CTEs. So like them until there are too many. I understand CTE provides that easy to use abstraction, and if we go with dbt, it's kind of like separate module. That's great. But if you have 20 CTEs and you could just write your query as a join of 3 tables, I will go with the join of 3 tables any day of the week. If it's faster, it's cheaper, it's more performance, better user experience.
Yeah, and Andrew Petrella and I were talking about this the other day on LinkedIn, and I love CTEs, especially where they're really performant, but also you lose a lot of ability to debug things in intermediate stages of your query, right? And also from the observability perspective, you can't be checking data in different stages. The CTE runs completely or it doesn't run at all, and you're not getting like stats within those individual subqueries.
Yeah.
So it's like the worst answer, like it depends. Everything truly. It
Yeah.
depends.
I mean, it's more of a craft, right? It's not, I think if we get too fixated in hard and fast rules, then it's hard to do a good job in this profession.
But you do have to balance it with standards though, right? Because otherwise.
Absolutely. 100%. An easy to read code is easier for somebody to be onboarded on, 100%. But when you come to that point where, oh, your code is slightly ugly, I will take a slightly ugly code, or like if it performs much better than a pretty code.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I mean, I remember back when I was doing software engineering with Python, there was one team I was on, it was very religious in terms of like code reviews and what we'd accept and whatnot. So everything had to be 79 characters or less per line. If it's 80, go redo it. So it was super strict. And I think because the belief as well, if I let this slide, I'm going to start letting other things slide. So so it was really tight. Whereas in other cases, in other teams, it was just it was kind of like, well, what's going to get the job done? And in that case, obviously, you do run the risk of kind of boundary creep, so to speak. So
so I think it's like as you get more and more experience, it's easier to understand the trade-offs. My example was while ago, I optimized the query, say it was running, I don't know, 20 minutes. I got it down to like a second. And my code got rejected because it wasn't formatted appropriately.
interesting.
And I was in shock. I was like, your functionality is not working right now, but you're delaying, which is actually, I didn't know that they even had standards. But
well, that's another issue. We can communicating standards with people, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, which is like, and I know like that's a pretty shocking example. Like, all right, fine, you deploy the code and then I'll make it pretty. That's cool, but my code was rejected because it didn't look to a certain standard.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's where I think it comes back to just making sure our other stakeholders who are doing the reviews understand, okay, it's like this is, some people do pick very petty things and don't bother kind of like, I think, looking at the entire context. Actually, Saket has a question here about modeling. Where do we close the trade-off? What's the minimum viable modeling? I think it's a good question.
It's also such a vague question. I think it would depend on specific need. And again, I've done modeling on the kind of like transactional supporting application side, but also an analytical side. To me, as long as you capture everything you need in your model and you pick the right platform, whether it's relational, non-relational, I would start there. For analytical, I mean, I am a huge fan of Data Vault because it's auditable. I've again been a DBA. So many times when people, oops, I updated it. Oh, can we roll it back? Having that ability to go back and see what happened, or, oh, crap, my formula was wrong. Can we recalculate it? No, we can't because we lost data in the transformation. So that's kind of where I start. But I think it's just talking through the architecture and kind of like, what is the functionality that you need your data to support, and what is the right platform? The other thing about data modeling actually specifically is, what is the skill set of your team? If your team is, say, all Oracle and you want to bring MongoDB, who is going to help you support it? So that's another thing to consider when you're making kind of like modeling decisions, even though it's platform tied into platform, but it's the skill set that you have available to you on your team.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I got this question recently. If you're working with both, say, analysts and data scientists, how do you think about modeling for data that's mostly going to be consumed by data scientists? Do you model it differently? Are you a little more relaxed about certain standards, or do you kind of apply the same standards?
Well, so specifically for data scientists, to make sure that we give them high quality data, we prefer to put them on Data Vault, right? Because it's auditable historical. They can actually go back and retrain their models. I'm worried when they kind of do their own sort of like, oh, I'm going to take data from here, I'm going to take data from there, I'm going to apply some business rules that might or might not be 100% correct. So we actually, the kind of like the perfect world, we would love to point our data scientists to Data Vault.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I think insert only, it's an idea that's been around for a long time, but its time has come, right? Like, for the most part, we shouldn't be losing a lot of historic data these days.
Yeah. It's like things change all the time, right? Like business rules, the way our business wants to look at, they want to see, oh, if we calculated something a certain way 3 months ago, now we calculate a different way. Can we recalculate it from 3 months ago? And traditionally, if you have dimensions of fact, you won't be able to do that. So kind of keeping that. And now we can store all data we need. Like, cloud platforms enable us to do that.
That's interesting. And then, the topic that's been on my mind too a lot has been modeling streaming data. So I know that Data Vault, I actually talked with Dan about this a few weeks ago, but I think one of the original things he said when he was working on it was made for event data back in the day. And I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that historical context, but I thought that was that's pretty cool. So I think that hopefully more people check out Data Vault. I do think it holds a lot of promise. I think that but if you're talking about pure event data that's going from events into say a non-Data Vault type system, right? Then that typically ends up being like in Snowflake a variant, right? That's just going to be a some sort of a semi-structured object, and that's where it gets a bit funky. Because the challenge is that schema could change at any point in time. We mentioned Mongo earlier. We've seen some absolute horror shows with Mongo. And I see great stuff with Mongo, but the horror shows, like people, I think, are notorious when we bring up, we saw somebody using dates for keys, which was pretty awesome.
Oh God, dates.
Yeah.
Which time zone?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I mean, those kinds of systems are great, and Mongo, we do work with them, and but I think like a lot of these systems are they're almost too flexible in the sense where if you don't have internal discipline, you're going to do something you regret.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Like the modern data stack tooling made things super easy, and all I can think about is like, anybody can get a license to drive a car, right? But you still have to like read a book and take a test. So like we need this like take a license test for modern data stack to at least have an idea of how to use it appropriately. It was like we just like, oh, here's a parking lot full of cars with keys in the ignition. Go knock yourself out.
Well, and then you find out you're in a demolition derby, actually.
Yeah, that's
and you didn't even know you're participating
all
in
I can think about like recent, I can't remember who the celebrity was, but like the 12-year-old took his Ferrari for a ride and smashed it into something.
Oh,
I mean,
interesting.
this is what's happening, right?
Oh, I thought it was a 5-year-old kid up here who took this sports car for a ride on the interstate.
Oh wow! At 5.
Did you read about that?
No, I don't think I did.
Yeah, I think it's his dad had like there's some sort of sports car, and he took it.
And it's not that it's the Ferrari's fault, right? Like we blame the tools for what we are doing with them.
Well, yeah, and that's. I mean, okay, this is an interesting thought experiment. So, what would a driver's license for the modern data stack look like? What would be the requirements?
Do you want to make it like really difficult, or?
I mean, I just want to be able to trust that if you're driving a car, you're not going to kill me and like a bunch of of bystanders.
I don't have an answer for that, but I thought about it, and like for me, I was lucky where I worked with people that were really good, so I learned from them, which is like, how do you get that experience? Where do you see it? If you hired into smaller company as the only engineer and you don't really have experience, you just learn by yourself. But I think these podcasts, a lot of trainings, a lot of blogs, and I would like to continue seeing that. And the other important thing, which I think you guys are good at, teaching somebody is difficult. It has to be like you have to explain it in a very simple way, which I know there are a lot of smart people around, but not everybody can actually distill the concepts in the way that others can understand. So maybe we need this like simple driving book, kind of, like this one, for modern data stack.
Well,
yeah, maybe someone needs
says
to
that's
write
not
that.
happening.
Yeah, maybe that's happening.
Yeah, we're actually working on a course right now, kind of distilling down the ideas of this book. Yeah, it's funny. I took this book. Hung out. I was over at Bill Inman's house last week, and the first thing he says when he grabs my book, and he's like, "This book's too big."
No one will
next
buy
book
it.
you write, you better make this thing about half the size. It's too big, and he just like throws it down. He didn't throw it down, but I was like, okay, thanks. But I thought that was pretty fun though. But he's right. I mean, because there's a lot to unpack. And especially when you get into things like data engineering or even modern data stack. I mean, defining that alone, I think, is one thing, and then defining what the skills are in order to operate within that. I think, so that's some of the stuff that we're trying to distill down to. Like, how would you distill this down even further into something that's more bite size? So analytics engineering, for example, right? That's I would say kind of a repackaging of a job for the existing jobs for the modern data stack, but it's still a job and it's still something that people do. And with these tools, and some things that come to mind is I think just understanding how these systems work. So for Snowflake, right? I mean, my version of the driver's license would be, okay, so at least if you're in Snowflake, go get your Snowflake Snowflake core cert. Like understand at least at a basic level, how does Snowflake work, and what are the guardrails on it? Same thing with all the tools you're using. Just how does basic ingestion work? What's the difference between replication and CDC, and basic data modeling techniques? Like these things are shockingly disparate on data teams, or sometimes non-existent. Matt and I talk about this a ton. We feel like actually one of the biggest opportunities right now is just leveling up the basic skill sets and competencies and knowledge of data teams. I always equate it to, okay, so if you were to pick people for a sports team, say for football for the Super Bowl, how would you do that? Right? Well, you're going to go after people that are have a good track record and they're coachable, and you're going to come up with a game plan. But the way we do data teams right now is kind of crazy. It's like, oh, like you can type on a keyboard, cool. Like you can be on our team. You know how to write SQL, awesome. You used to be DBA, cool. You know what a bar chart is, awesome. You're our new analyst. So it's just there's no standardization as far as I can tell.
Yeah, we see this all the time. And I've seen many people make the transition from just writing SQL to like managing the entire system and managing pipelines and everything. But I've also seen other cases where people are just thrown into that role with no desire to be in the role. And it just turns into a big mess. Like, oh, you're a good analyst. Why don't you be our data engineer now? Like over and over again. And another thing I might add for like, what are the various first things you teach? Well, if you think about driver's ed, at least in the US, they would show you these like horrible movies about drunk driving and such, which is good. They're bad, but at the same time, it's like, oh, if I'm driving a car, I can kill myself and other people. And I think in data, it's like, if I'm handling data, I can leak people's private information. I can cause a security breach. Like think about all the bad things that can happen and get training in those and just your basic responsibilities.
Oh my God.
Well, it's the storytelling, right? Like the rules of storytelling. First, you present the problem, and then you explain the solution.
I suppose, okay, I'm going to give you a horrible story related to what Matt was just saying with the drivers. So I remember I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, and it was pretty hilarious. It's actually kind of macabre and gross, but they, for the high school homecoming, or was it prom or something? Anyway, this was back in the 90s. And so they just got this like horribly mangled car and put it out and had all the students come out and stand in front of it. They're like, okay, now we're going to get 2 students in there and we're going to try and get them out. I'm like, and so that's what they proceeded to do. They had to, I was just like, this is crazy. So yeah, do something like that with the modern data stack, just scare people straight, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, I think even just reviewing a lot of security breaches and the potential consequences for companies and for your career too, like cloud data breaches, mishandling private information, lawsuits, like just impress on people like, yeah, the modern data stack is very powerful. But as soon as you're handling personally identifiable information or sensitive financial information, or
it's not just a modern data stack, though. It's a cloud. Like, what are you going to do? Put a bunch of like confidential records in a public S3 bucket,
which we've seen again and again.
What never happens.
Never happens.
My story about learning how to drive. My brother was teaching me how to drive actually a manual. He told me how to go, but he never told me how to stop. So as I'm driving, I'm like, how do I stop? How do I stop? We were like in the field somewhere. He's like, don't worry about it. I'll tell you when necessary. So let's not teach modern data stack like that.
That's insane.
It was fun, funny memory. Yeah.
And I'll just point out that this is a big issue potentially with like reverse ETL, right? I think it's great. I think data practitioners have been pushing data back to platforms forever. It's not actually a new concept. But again, if you're handling sensitive data, you have to be really, really careful about whom you share it with, as Facebook kind of learned the hard way a few years back.
And I mean, at this point, with more and more like regulations coming, I mean, very soon everything is going to be very sensitive data.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, so that's data modeling. There's a lot to it. I'm curious to see like what. Well, a couple of things I'm very curious for the next couple of years. One, hopefully things like Data Vault catch on. I just think it's actually a really good approach to things. I was reading the unified star schema. I think that's an interesting idea for analytics. Hey, what's up, Kent?
Hey, Kent.
Much power comes much. Yep, he's
True,
absolutely right.
true,
Uh,
true story.
so, and then it's kind of what's is there anything next on the horizon? I don't know. It's something that Matt and I talk about a lot, but we'll I don't know if you have any thoughts. But
I don't know. I'm just excited. I've been constrained in the data center for so long. When I finally made my move to the cloud, I was so happy. There's so many possibilities and opportunities. I would love for people to keep pushing forward and challenging the status quo. I know there's like a million companies, but it takes only one to do something amazing. So I'm like, I can't say that I'm all this like innovative or anything like that, but I'm excited of everything that's new that's coming. And it's actually kind of interesting story that I want to share with you of just like a very typical, old person DBA. When things started moving to the cloud, I was 100% against it. I was like, why? Everything's fine in the data center. And then we're like, you have to move to the cloud. And we're like, well, let's test it and prove that it's actually not a good idea.
hmm.
So we started testing it. And to be honest, whatever, we were moving to AWS, whatever AWS recommended was not a good idea. But we went like a completely different route because the cloud gives you so many things and opportunities and chances. And I absolutely fell in love. I'm like, what you can do creatively, smartly in the cloud is amazing. And I was like, so my goal was to prove that it's not a good idea. By I ended up completely just, I'm like, I don't want to be in the data center ever again.
Yeah, and I think we've started to see a lot of pushback on the cloud. I mean, practically every day on Hacker News, you have these articles about how expensive the cloud is, and it's like, well, yeah, if you're not smart about it, I mean, the point is you can't just throw your workloads into the cloud and expect good results. You're going to cost yourself a ton of money. But if you're smart about it, the cloud allows just amazing opportunities. And maybe some of the basic training for data engineers is about things like FinOps and evaluating your costs and cost benefit analysis and such.
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example, right? So, I mean, the other day I was spinning up some stuff in Google Cloud for an upcoming demo video that I'm making, and just the fact that I could do that, right? The fact that Google just announced this cool thing, I can go try it out that day. It works really well. It was streaming data into BigQuery, and that's pretty cool. I mean, I didn't have to ask my IT department if I can do this. Let me see. It cost next to nothing and took like, let me see, 2 minutes to set everything up. And so I don't know.
But
There's
then,
a
but
lot to
then the
like.
other side, the gotcha there is that,
Mhm.
imagine a team of 200 engineers and all of them easily set everything up and forgot to shut it down.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And this is where
Well,
the cost is coming. But that's been happening since, cloud became a thing
well, for
because
sure. And
people were
and there's some
flexible.
things too. I mean, if you have I mean, I think it really depends on how you want to set up all your different environments too. Like definitely have a sandbox environment where you can feel free to knock everything out, but just, maybe have a policy where it's like everything gets torn down at the, end of the month, regardless of what
Exactly.
it is. Right. So,
Or you have to put in a special extension and tag it and say, hey, I want this extended for another month and make a
Exactly. It's
request.
just that
yeah,
somebody has to be responsible for it. And I
Yeah.
think going to the cloud, it's not that the bill is higher, it's just easier to see it. Because
for
when you
sure.
first time I moved to Snowflake, the first query I wrote, I knew exactly how much it cost. And I was like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't be running anything.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
no, I should still be running stuff and taking advantage of the cloud platform.
Yeah.
I just don't do stupid stuff.
Well, that's part of the driver's license part too, I would say, is like definitely
Exactly.
understand costs and cost control. Like
Yeah.
this is something we hit on too. I think the most important things is like, obviously security, that comes first because without something goes wrong there, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Cost is a really big one though. This is something we do a lot of workshops and trainings on with companies because it's like this is easily the thing you could screw up the most. We noticed with Snowflake, people would get that, and who is it? Milan actually has a thing here. One of the leaving an XSL warehouse on over the
Oh,
holidays.
ouch.
We've seen kind of the equivalents of these before, and these are the kinds of things that'll get your data team at a minimum a black eye, and probably some people fired for doing this kind of stuff if it goes
I,
on too long.
we've all heard these stories, but just being intentional about it. And the other
Yeah.
thing that I really like about the cloud, so we're like, everybody's like real-time data streaming, let's stream. Do we have to? Do we need to? What's the best job in Snowflake is the one that's not running. So
Mhm.
like really be intentional about what you need. Like I am all on board with near real-time data. That's great, but do you really need it for everything?
Well, that's just it. And in FinOps, like if you read the FinOps book, the O'Reilly book, it's not just about saving money. It's about cost benefit analysis. It's about making money. And so what I tell people is, look, almost every business of a moderate size has a good real-time use case where they will make money off of that real time. But don't just jump in and convert everything to real time. Like find that really good use case and make money off of it, and then figure out what you're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. This Ken actually has a good point here too. It's kind of always has good points,
Yeah.
but it's just governance is so
Yes.
required more so now. I 1,000 bajillion% agree on that. So astute points. I'm just looking at the thoughtful data. A lot of good comments. Thoughtful data modeling and architecture. Let's talk about that in the remaining 15 minutes. So, which is a topic that you can talk for about 15 years about. But what to you? What is architecture?
So what is architecture? A well-designed data ecosystem. The one that kind of grows with business, the one that just stepping a little bit back, like it's not specifically data modeling. It's not your, 5.5 tables or one giant table. It's actually kind of like everything, right? Like, how do you position your platform in a way that it grows with business and you can easily swap out components, right? Like ingestion, a tool, amazing today, tomorrow something new comes along. How do you swap it out? It's always been like, is that again, another interesting concept, bundling, unbundling, right? Like we hate when we're fully bought into one system. We hate it, but we also hate it when we need 50 systems and tools to support something. So to me, like stepping at that kind of like high level tooling architecture, but also again around data. What is your data architecture? When is it relational? When is it non-relational? What do you stream? When do you micro batch? When do you actually just write to one place and read from it? When do you transform in on the way in? When do you transform after the fact? When is it ETL or ELT? Like all of these things, how but ultimately, what is that your company need? What is your company's needs? And design your architecture around that.
And I think another thing to keep in mind is that in a cloud environment, there really is a lot more independence. In other words, it shouldn't be like the old days where your data center team decides exactly what gets deployed into the cloud. And so the architect's role is to kind of define like the high level best practices, the best tool selections, and then like the common infrastructure. But then within that, there can be a lot of flexibility.
And set the guardrails.
And set the guardrails, yeah.
Mhm.
And then maybe cost monitoring and other tools as well, and FinOps principles, yeah.
And it's like, should we, throw like kind of like the culture? You set the guardrails, but you also need to help people learn
Yep.
how to use things and prevent silos. That's kind of always been a big thing. Everybody goes off does their own thing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, how do we work together?
Well, I mean, we call this out in Principle 4 in our book under architecture. Architecture is leadership. So you're always trying to lead from the front and empower people too. Don't just, I mean, because the issues that Matt and I had or have with traditional architecture is, for the longest time, it was very much command and control. It's like I'm the architect and you are my, minlings, and you can do that, do all the work for me. And I'm like, the world doesn't work like this anymore. If you try and do this with a dev team, they'll tell you to get lost. So
yeah, it used to be like, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, architects that like design this thing completely disconnected from anything or anybody, and they're like, here you go, build this, and we're like, no, that won't work. But thank you, pretty picture.
Yeah, like no one should be stepping in and saying, okay, we're going to buy, a $10 million Teradata system and everyone has to use it. Like, I think it makes a lot more sense to say Snowflake is like our preferred platform. If you're a data scientist and you have a specialized use case and you need something else, like talk to us and we'll figure it out.
I think it does depend on the company.
It does
though,
depend
too,
on the
right?
company.
So I mean, if you're,
Absolutely,
if there's a need and it fits, I suppose you.
Well, it's partially like the 80-20, right? Like there isn't
Right.
a tool that'll satisfy 100% of your requirements. So you focus on the ones that are most important, and you kind of have that center core tool or platform. And then anything additional, you just kind of figure it out. And then the other thing is like, if it's difficult to do, should you even be doing it? That's always like somebody once time mentioned, like you're looking to buy something, but nobody sells it. They should tell you that maybe you don't need it. Uh, so that's another thing. And again, the goal is to keep it simple. If it's simple, then it's easy to, upgrade, adapt, adjust. But if it's complicated, then you're stuck with it.
Mike Nash has a good question here. Is architecture governed by the technology or the purpose of the data first?
We have an opinion on this.
What's our opinion, Matt?
I want to hear Veronica's opinion.
Yeah, I
first,
wanna hear
and then
Veronica's
we'll
too.
go-
I'll let you go first, and then I'll agree. It'll give me time to think about it.
Okay, I mean, the way we frame it is with our modern architecture, you start more with high-level organizational decisions and data flow decisions, and then you think about technology afterward, and you slot the technology into the data flows. And in some sense, the whole book is written in that way, right? It's actually about the life cycle, like you were saying, the life of these bytes that move through the system, and then you think, okay, but what systems make sense for those bytes to
Well, it's
move
about
through?
modularity and
Yeah.
making reversible decisions.
Yeah.
So you don't want to get caught in a bear trap, right? Where it's easy to get in and it's extremely painful to get out. So, but I think this happens to a lot of teams that are technology first. Is inevitably, you better damn well know the limitations of this technology and the alternatives. So,
But then the other side, which is great, I 100% agree with you. But the reality is that sometimes you walk into a company and they have what they have.
they have what they
Or
have.
there's
It's also
new
true.
leadership that comes in and says, oh, well, you just migrated hypothetically to AWS. Tomorrow we're going to migrate to Azure. They
Mhm.
don't particularly. So you just, hopefully you're focused on delivering value to business and kind of data first. But sometimes you have to deal with trade-offs, and sometimes
Mhm.
you have to work around specific tech stack that was chosen.
So how would you in a situation like that where you are inheriting something that's either been already in existence or is a decision that's handed down to you? I mean, what are some ways that you suggest that handling that?
Um, well, you deal with it, right? You make the best. Like platforms exist and were built for a reason, and not like, obviously I have platforms that I love that I would like to work with, um, and but if you're handed over a platform, you just learn how to use it to the best ability. Or if it's a completely outdated and it's not supporting the needs of the business, you make a business case of why it should be replaced. And like obviously there's a cost associated with replacing platforms, especially if it's pretty kind of like one that's sitting in the middle of everything in that tangled web of things, and how the company would benefit from it. And other times, if you just can't find an agreement, you have to go find another job. um,
It's happens too. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting too. Just I think a lot of the decisions, we kind of call it a hippo-driven development, the highest paid person's opinion, and sometimes this just is reality of it. I mean, and Milan, I think, correctly points out, sometimes reversible decisions aren't always possible. Sometimes you have to kind of deal with uh, so if you take the thought experiment, you're dropped off in the middle of Antarctica, for example. You're gonna have to figure out how to manage that situation. So, and that's unfortunately what a lot of data team decisions feel like, that aren't immediately in the data team's control.
Well, and even things like going to the cloud, right? Okay, so you can start migrating to the cloud, but once you get rid of those data centers, release your leases or sell them or whatever, it's really, really expensive to get them back. And so it's kind of a one-way door that you really have to commit
yeah.
to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's true. There are some decisions that are reversible, right? And you kind of want to try and test those out, but some decisions are irreversible, and sometimes there will be wrong. Like that's the reality of life. You do your best, obviously, to kind of again focus on delivering value to your business, but sometimes
If
that's
you
not how it works.
Yeah, and I mean, if you use the example of like, okay, so you have to land on Azure. It's probably not your favorite cloud that you want to go with, but the thing is, you can make a lot of things work, right? Like it's. I mean, a lot of companies have done very well on Azure and any other cloud. And I think as long as you understand kind of the underlying fundamentals of just working in the cloud, and then understand how that cloud works, you probably be successful-ish. So
I remember one of the companies I worked for, and we had this monolith SQL server backing up website, and one team wanted to go to Mongo, and not that there's anything wrong with Mongo, just their use case was not for Mongo. And we tried to convince them that it's not the right decision, and they just wouldn't listen. And my
mm,
boss at the time said, you know what, we're going to make it work because we're that good. Even though it's a wrong decision, we will still make it work because we are that good.
mhm.
So I know that anybody
Good
on this
attitude.
call can make anything work. It'll be painful and probably very expensive. But if you're stuck with that decision, that choice that was made for you, I know you'll make it work.
Yeah. I guess you do have to take kind of the SEAL Team 6 approach to stuff, right? Just, you have to improvise, make it work. But it can't brings up a couple good points. There's also cost of staying at the wrong platform. No one, the concept of sunk cost, it definitely eats you alive. Matt and I call this, total opportunity cost of ownership too. There's total cost of ownership, but there's also the cousin of, what are you missing out on now that you're stuck? So, and in this day and age, I would say it's getting stuck is, I would argue it's harder because there's more options and there's more modularity. And so if you're stuck, I think you should really ask why.
And I think one of the most common reasons that teams get stuck is they are stuck completely on-prem. And so now instead of being able to spin up like managed Kafka in an hour, it's going to take me 6 months and purchase orders and planning and licensing to get Kafka running
Yeah, but what if
on-prem.
you're stuck in the cloud? What if you
You
did
get
something
stuck there
stupid
too.
where you're stuck in the cloud?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that's
in
true.
a certain process.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that though, right? If you're spinning up everything on your own VMs, that's definitely one way to do it. But
Well, here's
you have
another way
thoughts
to spin it. I was chatting with somebody recently, and they said, oh, well, if we use Snowflake specific SQL, then we're stuck on Snowflake platform. So fair, but if you don't use Snowflake specific SQL and you go with like something else, then you're missing out potentially on the optimizations and improvements that are specifically for that platform. So how do you balance that? Like
And
you don't want to be stuck on the platform, but you kind of do.
Yep. And I've heard other people talk about this concept too, but it's that you identify your exit strategy, right? So you say, all right, we're on Snowflake, but suppose the worst case scenario happened. What's my exit strategy? How do I get out of this?
Well, it's when I take my kids climbing outside. I take them bouldering a lot, and those are pretty small, right? So bouldering means you're climbing without a rope. And so the first thing I always teach my kids is, well, you need to know the down climb. How are you going to get off this thing if you manage to get up? Or if you need to jump, if you're going to fall, like what's the fall zone? So you're not going to get maimed.
What's your backup plan? It's like, like every, self-respected DBA has a backup plan or plan B.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's your plan?
Yeah, worse now. It's kind of like, oh, I'll just throw more compute at it. It'll eventually work. So
we used to call it throw hardware at it. Now it's like I mentioned it to somebody. They looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "That's what you do when you throw more compute at it."
Well, it's funny to talk to Gen Z, and I think many of them don't really even know what a spinning disk is because they just didn't grow up with it like us. They're like, wait, what is that exactly? Like, okay, I have to sit down and explain and then show them pictures because they grew up with SSDs and with phones and things that we did not have when we grew up.
Well, I think I showed you that Wired article from several months ago. So a college professor actually asked the students, okay, so I need you to go into this folder and find this file. And a bunch of these freshman age students couldn't figure out what he meant by that. They had no concept of a folder or a file because they're used to searching. So anyway, wow. Veronica's gonna cry now. So
I was like, I can't even imagine not knowing how to go to a folder to find the file.
That's awesome. Cool. We're coming up on time. I know we probably didn't get to everything you want to talk about. What's one last topic you want to talk about?
What's next for you guys? What's the next big exciting thing? The book's out. What's next?
Well, I think cat's out of the bag. We are working on a data engineering course. based upon the book, and I think based upon some other stuff too.
Yeah.
So Matt, do you want to maybe talk about that for a couple seconds?
Yeah, we're just kind of in the early stages of building it out, but I think our plan is to start with kind of a free version that will probably just be like 1 or 2 lessons, and then get feedback on that, and then we're planning to expand out to a full course that will be a paid version. And we're still working on a lot of the concepts, but like it definitely needs to expand beyond what the book offers. And so part of what we're looking at is trying to get a lot of thought leaders involved and giving different input and such. A lot of different ideas in the modern data stack and just modern data in general in the cloud.
Yeah, and the other thing we've got a lot of interest is just corporate trainings. So since the book's come out, I mean, I think I've counted over 100 companies using our book now for study groups or team readings or something like that. And so that's definitely something we're getting a lot more interest in, is just coming in and doing trainings. Which training's always been something we've done as a business, and so that's something we're leaning into more. But yeah, so that's what we're up to.
Very exciting.
Yeah, and also working. I got another book. I don't want to bring Matt into it just yet because he's working on the course. But yeah. So
do you want to talk about that yet, or hold off for a bit?
We'll hold off.
We can talk about it another time. Yeah, it's related to today's conversation in some way.
Yeah, some people know about it, but yeah. But awesome. Veronika, it's always good to talk to you, and I guess you and I will be talking next week. So with who is it? Chris Tab, Sonny, and a couple other people. So sorry, my dog, she tries to open the door here, so she's
I think she just likes playing with the door stopper.
No, she's pretty smart. She'll open the door in a second with her hands. So or paws, I guess she doesn't really have hands. That'd be weird. So Veronika, for people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
Connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I generally respond to everybody, so please absolutely connect to me on LinkedIn.
That's awesome.
I'm also in every single Slack channel you can possibly find. DBT, Locally Optimistic, Snowflake.
Nice.
So you can find me in multiple places.
Yeah, I think we met in Locally Optimistic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great Slack group. So cool. Well, thanks to the audience. Great questions. Lots of comments here. Really excited that everyone could tune in a Friday afternoon of all times to talk about the riveting topics of data modeling and architecture. So,
well, thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Anytime. Yeah. On Monday morning data chat, we have Josh Starmer from StatsQuest. If you've never heard of him, go check him out. If you're one of the almost 1 million subscribers on his YouTube channel, then you probably know who he is. And then next Friday, we have Juan Cicada on the show talking about whatever he wants to talk about. He's a pretty smart guy. So
can I also plug in your newsletter, or you guys should
please
plug
do.
in
your... You plug it. This is how you found us, actually.
Yeah. So Joe and Matt have a newsletter. People should go to. I don't even remember how I signed up for it.
I think it's at ternarydata.com. This website here. And yeah.
My favorite part of it is the rants, data rants, and they're just incredible and amazing. And one of them spoke to me, and that's how I reached out to Joe. So highly recommend it.
Yeah, thanks. That was so cool because we didn't know if anyone was actually reading it or not. So we just write these things and it feels like we're screaming at the sky. So
no, you're screaming at the right people.
That's awesome.
Hopefully, at more people.
Well, we're going through a process now to make like right now it's hard to get the old issues because if you weren't on the mailing list, you have to have someone forward them. So we're working on a process to make those all searchable at some point in the near future.
And Colleen, thanks Colleen. She put newsletter, but we're gonna I mean most likely stay tuned. I think as soon as next week we'll actually have it available, perhaps on Substack or something like that.
And hopefully not folders and files, but something searchable.
Well, it's anything's easier than what we have now, but I think that the notion behind the newsletter is we wanted to keep it kind of like how I don't know if you used to trade mixtapes with people back in the 80s and 90s, but they were it was kind of special back then. That's what I felt like the newsletter should be like. I actually did not want it widely distributed for that reason. If it was forwarded to you, then that actually meant it was probably pretty good. I think there's almost too much publicly available data information and not enough stuff that's a bit more underground. But now that we're
I'm sorry I mentioned it to anybody, but let me know. I'll forward every single weekly newsletter to you. We'll keep it a well-known secret.
No, it's I think with the book, the door is open now. So yeah, feel free to share it all. So yeah, it's awesome. So Veronika will be the equivalent of Napster about 20 years ago. So well, awesome. So yeah, thanks again. as yeah, Kent says just in time for beer 30 here, and I think it is for everyone else. So
And Chris is speaking from London time, I believe, or is he?
9 p.m.
9 p.m.
Yeah, it's about beer time there. So, awesome, cool. Veronika, have a good one.
You as
Talk
well.
to you soon.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.